After weeks and months of wondering if hockey would come back, defying common sense and defying the fact that hockey was going to restart in October with the 2020-2021 season, many thought that the 2019-2020 season was going to be shortened and remain suspended. But Gary Bettman and the NHL surprised us with the announcement that came last week that hockey would be back starting on July 10th, starting with a 3-week training camp prior to the NHL postseason starting up. The NHL postseason will be different than any other year before, with an 8-team round robin tournament consisting of the top four teams in each conference. But that's a subject for a different video. This video is about the other 16 teams that will be competing to become Stanley Cup champion. Starting on the West Coast, we're going to break down the matchup between the Chicago Blackhawks and the Edmonton Oilers. The Chicago Blackhawks are nowhere near the team that they once were, as age has broken down the once unbeatable dynasty in Chicago and made way for new teams. New teams to make their stake as the top team in the West. Even though Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane are both still with their long-standing teams, they are not in the position that they once were, as the Blackhawks are actually number 12th ranked in the tournament, are in the playoffs, and one of the teams that barely scraped by and barely got in to the tournament, into the postseason. There might actually be a case to be made to say that the Blackhawks may not have belonged in the postseason this time around, or if things were a little bit different, then maybe they wouldn't have been in the postseason. Because the reality of the situation is, normally the NHL postseason is cut off at 8 teams, and that would have left the Blackhawks, the Coyotes, the Minnesota Wild, and the Winnipeg Jets looking from the outside in and wondering what they did wrong. Comparing the Blackhawks, though, to other teams like the Sharks, the Kings, and the Red Wings especially, there is no doubting that the Blackhawks are nowhere near as bad as some of the other teams. But that also shows how much more competitive the West is than the East, or maybe how much better the Blackhawks are. But the fact of the matter is, the Blackhawks are nowhere near where they once were as a team. But that's what happens when age catches up. Because age catches up with everybody, no matter what happens. It catches up with everybody, and that's what happened to Duncan Keith. That's what happened to Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews. They are still among the best, but just other people join them at the top of the mountain. And I guess, in a way, the best way to put it is the Edmonton Oilers, in many respects, were the dynasty, were going to be the dynasty that many people thought, based on their acquisition of, or their drafting of, Connor McDavid, but they just haven't been able to put everything together like the Blackhawks did for those years. With Corey Crawford getting older and injuries getting more common, and just everything, basically salary cap, money, and everything just catching up to the Blackhawks, it became a time when the Blackhawks couldn't sustain it anymore. And it's been the fall of the once amazing dynasty. But for once, they actually were able to cash in on their dynasty. As for the Edmonton Oilers have been struggling to find their footing as a successful team. I might not have been watching hockey forever, but what I can say is that the Oilers used to be the laughingstock of hockey. And once they drafted Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, many thought that they would change their reputation. But the fact of the matter is, one player doesn't make a team. Just ask the Angels in baseball. One player doesn't make a team. You can get that player, but you have to surround him with other people. You have to surround him with players that make it not possible for a team to shut your one guy down. Because when Wayne Gretzky was on the Oilers back in the 80s, it wasn't just Wayne Gretzky. Wayne Gretzky had a 1B, a 1C, a 1D. Wayne Gretzky had people that he could depend on, that if Wayne Gretzky was having an off day, then that didn't mean that the Oilers were going to lose. But with Connor McDavid having an off day, even with Ryan Nugent-Hopkins and Leon Draisaitl, you don't know. So you don't know where the Oilers are as far as ever becoming a Stanley Cup contender. But what we do know is McDavid and Draisaitl were having their best record-breaking seasons this year, with both McDavid and Draisaitl looking to break or set not only career highs, but maybe set the records for points in a season, breaking Nikita Kucherov's record from last year. As both Draisaitl broke 110 points before the season was suspended, and Connor McDavid had 97 before the season was suspended. I'm not saying that the Oilers might not be able to sustain the success that comes with being a winning team, and they may stick as a mediocre team. But the fact of the matter is, the Oilers have a future as long as McDavid and Draisaitl can stay healthy, but they also have to know that two players don't make a team. You have to be able to surround them with the defense and other players to take the pressure off of them. If you could do that, you have a winning team. Or you have a more likely chance to have a winning team. But if you can't, the odds become excessively difficult, in my opinion. Let's move to the next West Coast games or West Coast game, and that is with the Arizona Coyotes and the Nashville Predators. Now, as I mentioned earlier, at one point the Oilers used to be the laughingstock of the league. They at one point shared that title with the Coyotes. Because how many years in a row was it alternating that the Coyotes were at the top of the NHL draft lottery, right with the Oilers as one of the worst teams from the previous season? The Coyotes have had arena problems and struggles with drawing fans to their stadiums because, for the most part, people don't want to see a losing team consistently year in and year out. The Arizona Coyotes have turned a corner, it seemed like, or maybe they have, this year, with a 33-29 record and ranking 5th or falling 5th in the Western Conference, ahead of their neighbors in California. But the real question is, do the Coyotes have what it takes? Do the Coyotes have the chance to be the upset this year? Or will it just be another season for the Coyotes to fall victim to just being not that good? And questioning where to go next. You know, it seems like the Coyotes have a decent mixture of youngsters with Taylor Hall and, you know, like people who, it's like people who found their footing somewhere else as like a guy with potential, but never got that chance to stick out somewhere else. But they also have veterans like Brad Richardson and Phil Kessel and Derek Stepan who are getting the chance to stand and still play and lead youngsters like Lawson Croson, Christian Dvorak, Christian Fisher, Connor Garland, you know, Barrett Hayton, who's actually 20 years old. Dumbfounding. But we also can't forget that the Coyotes is still home to one of the best defensemen in hockey in Oliver Ekman-Larsson. I don't know what the expectations are for the Coyotes, but what I can say is that the Predators are the odds-on favorite for, as expected, I'm sure, for this matchup. But the fact of the matter is, you never know, because everybody thought that the Tampa Bay Lightning was going to run away with it last year, and they end up losing to the Blue Jackets. I'm not saying that the Coyotes could win. I'm just saying that you just never know. As far as our friends the Predators have really been having an up and down couple years. Because I remember when the Predators were the odds-on favorite when they made it to the Cup. They made it all the way. And I remember them, you know, people questioning if, with Mike Fisher, if the Predators could do it. That was a few years ago. Things have changed. You know, Matt Duchene's here, Flip Forsberg, Ryan Johansson, Kyle Turris. They got some new faces. And some old ones mixing it, you know, Pekka Rinne still between the pipes. But The question is, can they handle it? Can they handle the pressure? Or will the pressure be too much for the young team? Because the one thing is this: playoff experience does help. Because the hunger that you feel of wanting to be a success on the biggest stage, and there is no bigger stage than the NHL postseason, especially this year, with it being played out differently than it ever has been before, that there is no bigger stage, but the pressure, especially for a team, or especially for players that may have never been in this situation before, it's learning experiences more than anything else. It's not something you just grasp right away. It takes time. It takes luck. And some people might say that, the home ice advantage would have played for the Predators, and it would have played for the Oilers, and it would have played for the Blackhawks, and it would have played for any other team. But the fact of the matter is, that's not happening this year. There's no fans. Home ice advantage has gone out the window. That's a fact. But we're gonna have to wait and see, because I think some of the West Coast games are more open-ended of the way they could go than the East Coast games. But I guess many people thought that was the case last year, like I said, with the Blue Jackets and the Tampa Bay Lightning, and look at how that turned out. Before I forget, I will only be covering the West Coast games in this video, because otherwise this video would be way too long. And I'm just going to cover the West Coast in this video and the East Coast in another video to split things up, to allow both conferences to have an accurate, a fair amount of time to be discussed. With that being said, let's go to our next West Coast game, and that is between the Vancouver Canucks and the Minnesota Wild. I remember a couple years ago when the Vancouver Canucks were first starting their rebuild, and it is hard to believe how quick the turnover has happened to where the Canucks have really turned into a different organization, and in a way righted the ship almost. I guess maybe changing the perception and fixing it to a degree helped them see a little bit better. Don't get me wrong, the Canucks are still mediocre and middle of the road. But fixing up some of the contracts, getting rid of, seeing legends like the Sundin twins retire, getting guys like Jordy Ben in, and JT Miller, and Jay Beagle from Washington, and Tanner Pearson from the Kings, it helped. It helped change the perception. Change the perception, change how you're viewed. Even though the Canucks are ranked number 7 this year, that's middle of the road for a team that 2 years ago was rebuilding. That is a great place to be for a team that 2 years ago was rebuilding. Which is amazing. And, for all I know, they could be back to where, they could switch spots with the Wild next year and be number 10. But the point is, they're in a good position this year, and it is unclear where things will go for them, because I think if there are any series that are up in the air and could go either way, even though the odds are on the Canucks to win, the Canucks versus the Wild, the Flames versus the Jets, and the West Coast, I think, are the two series that could go either way. The Blackhawks have an uphill battle to shut down McDavid and Draisaitl and Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. It just might be too overwhelming for them against the Oilers. The Coyotes, they could surprise us, but I think the Predators have it on lockdown, as far as I'm concerned. As far as the Wild and the Canucks, it could go either way. Honestly, it depends on if the Canucks come in with a chip on their shoulder and something to prove, that they want to prove that they're not the laughingstock of the league, and that they've righted the ship, and they want hockey to matter in Vancouver again, then that might be just enough for them to beat the Wild and move to the next round. Do I think they have what it takes to make it far in the playoffs? Honestly, I don't know enough about the Canucks, and I would love for somebody to tell me in the comment section that may know a little bit more if they think that the Canucks have what it takes to make it far, or if the Wild's going to be too much for them. Speaking of the Wild, we can shift over to the Minnesota Wild now and look at a team that, again, at one point was at the top of the league and one of the best teams in the Central Division and the Western Conference, and now are number 6 in the Western Conference Central Division, 35-27 this season with 77 points. I don't know if it's age, I don't know if it's other teams just getting better, and the Wild standing pat because they don't have the ability to get better. But if you look at the top 10 list for people with points, in the league, Zach Parise is nowhere to be found. I know injuries have been a problem for Mr. Parise and a lot of the Minnesota Wild players for years. That they've had problems staying healthy. They've had problems over-relying on Devan Dubnyk, and Dubnyk becoming, to a point, running on fumes by the time playoffs come along. But with Alex Galchenyuk, with Matt Zuccarello, Parise, Mikko Koivu, as long as they're healthy, the Wild are a good team still. But that's the big question. Because when you've been laid up and you're not playing hockey, you go from playing hockey every other day, or maybe every day, or every couple days, and skating around and, putting that pressure on your body and putting that expectation on your body that you're going to make it through this game and be good, and then you shut down for 3 months or 4 months, and then you have to start over again in July. Training camp for the Wild is going to be important to see if their players can get back on track and adjust, because there are few teams that have had problems staying healthy more than the Wild. And if they can move that forward and just flow right in, I think they'll be fine. And I think they may run away with it from the Canucks standpoint. I don't know that they'll win the Stanley Cup, but I think I think they have a chance to beat the Canucks if their players can come in healthy, because there's too much depth on that roster to not have a legitimate chance as long as everyone is healthy and can adjust to being back playing hockey again after being laid off, being suspended after the season has been suspended for as long as it has been, and people have not been playing. Before the last set of games, which is the Calgary Flames and the Winnipeg Jets, I just wanted to mention something once again, that I am not going to be talking about the East Coast or the Eastern Conference in this video. The video would just be too long to talk about the Eastern Conference and the Western Conference and give every game an accurate breakdown. To catch up, to also mention that before the end of the video, I will give my predictions on who I think will win every game in the Western Conference. And before I do that, and I will say a player to watch, or 2 players to watch from the Western Conference as well before the video is over. So with that being said, let's jump into our last game, the Calgary Flames versus the Winnipeg Jets. Now it's time to talk about the Winnipeg Jets. The Winnipeg Jets, the underdogs of the NHL in many respects, because their top players often end up leaving because they don't have the salary cap. They're not a major market team, but they continue to put on display what chemistry does for a team. And with Patrick Laine leading the charge, there is potential there. But the question is the potential there now? Right now, they are leading the season series between them and the Flames 1-0, but that doesn't change the fact that when the pressure is on, can the players that they have really cash in? Or is the inexperience going to catch up with the youngsters in Winnipeg? I think that Winnipeg has a decent mixture of youngsters and veterans, but the real question is, are they ready to move forward? The answer, we'll have to find out, because the only series that I couldn't find out where the odds were was Winnipeg and Calgary, because it's an even trade-off. Nobody knows what they think. Nobody knows who they think is going to catch the win in this series. And that just shows how even both these teams are. And it's going to make for an interesting series, in my opinion. Now, if you look at Calgary on the other side of the coin, because, also I just want to point out, with the Oilers and the Blackhawks, it was number 5 seed versus number 12. The Predators versus Coyotes, 6 versus 11, and Canucks versus the Wild was 7 versus 10. The Flames and the Jets, 8 versus 9. It's an even trade-off. They're right next to each other. It's very similar teams. And it's going to make, like I said, it's going to make for an interesting postseason. The Flames finished 3rd in the postseason, in the standings, in their division. Though Winnipeg does have top scorers like Kyle Connor and Mark Scheifele with both 73 points as the season came to a close, and Blake Wheeler and Patrick Laine. There's a lot of as I said, there's a lot of potential there. There's a lot of potential there for the Winnipeg Jets, if they can click on all cylinders, if they can find a way. From what I remember about the Flames, I don't know if they've changed because some of the players have been cycled in and cycled out. Some of the goalies have been cycled in and cycled out. And, some names are the same, some names are different. Mark Giordano is still there, the captain. Sean Monahan, Johnny Gaudreau, Mikael Backlund, Sam Bennett, etc. But you also have veterans like Milan Lucic that joined the fray, and Eric Gustafsson. My point is, the Flames have always had a problem with being very spotty. Very hot at one point, and then when the fire burns out, no pun intended, it's very hard to reignite it. The Flames have potential, just like the Jets, and got the benefit of playing a team that is very similar to them. The only question is, will the fire be lit the first week in August when the NHL postseason starts, or will it need time to reignite after the season got suspended? Since the season got suspended. Because in my opinion, as long as the Jets, as long as the Flames can beat the Jets, and if it takes time for the flame to ignite, and it slowly gets hotter and hotter and hotter as the series progresses against the Jets, that's going to benefit the Flames. So even if they lose game 1, as long as they show signs of waking up before it's too late, there will be no problem for them to catch them. And in my opinion, even though I'm saying that the Flames do have potential to have the opportunity to verse the Jets, as that's their best chance, unless they were versing unless they were versing a different team, but with the with the draw that they got, it's a very hard choice. So I'm going to start with the easy ones. I don't know that the Blackhawks will be able to shut down both McDavid, Draisaitl, and Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, so I'm going to say that the Oilers will get one over on the former champions and win their series against the Blackhawks. The Predators are more than likely going to get the victory over the Coyotes, unless the Coyotes pull a Blue Jackets and just come out of the woodwork and shock the world. I'm going to go with the Minnesota Wild against the Canucks, even though I think that's it could go either way. I think I'm going to go with the Minnesota Wild. And as far as the Jets versus the Flames, I'm going to go with the Winnipeg Jets, not because of the fact of what I said about the Flames having some difficulty staying hot, even if they got hot. It's just the fact that I think that there's more meat on the bone when it comes to the Jets, and more sustainability in pressure situations. And it's going to benefit the Jets because they're going to be hungry to prove themselves in this postseason. Those are my selections for the Western Conference. At this point, I still don't know what's going to happen as far as where the games are going to be played. I'm going to do a little bit more research to see if I can find out where the games are going to be played for the Western Conference, because as we know, Vegas will be the host for the Eastern Conference games this year. Outside of that, I will let you know where Western Conference games will be played in the next video, or if somebody wants to enlighten me in the comment section, feel free. But these are my predictions for the Western Conference of the NHL postseason. Let me know your comments down below on my breakdown of the series, and who you believe could be the breakthrough players in this postseason. In my opinion, players to watch are obviously Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl. I would say it's hard, it's hard to say. It's hard to say only because you don't know if you're going to find somebody with something to prove. Because I could see Patrick Kane being a player to watch because he has something to prove, to show that he's still got it. That he can still put the Blackhawks on his back and prove himself over again. But you also may have guys like Scheifele and Kyle Connor in Winnipeg wanting to prove, and Blake Wheeler wanting to prove that his best years aren't behind him. Blake Wheeler, not Scheifele and Connor, they're still young, but that they want to prove that they can stand up and make hockey matter in Winnipeg. That they're not supposed to be taken lightly, that they shouldn't be taken lightly. you can, basically what I'm saying is, you can pick the obvious, or you can pick the interesting. I'm going to go with the interesting. But all we'll have to do is wait and see what happens on July 10th. We still got time for some more videos, and I'm enjoying talking about the NHL, so we're going to, in the coming weeks, or the coming days, you're going to hear about my predictions for the Eastern Conference. Until then, see you next time.